it's Jazz at Red Panda Reads, and this is my November reading wrap-up. So you're all probably thinking, ooh, I wonder how Jasmine's non-fiction November went. Well, the answer is very poorly. So today I'm just going to talk about the fictional books I read during the month of November, and then later on, once I've finished all the books I was trying to read for non-fiction November, I will wrap up my non-fiction reads. So let's get started. So I realised I had a very fantasy focused month. I read a total of 6 books, excluding non-fiction, and of those, 1 was a sci-fi, 4 of them were fantasy, and the last one was a gothic thriller. It was not a gothic thriller. That's how it was advertised. It was not at all a gothic thriller in my limited understanding of what a gothic thriller is. But let's get started. So the first book I want to talk about is The Original, which is a co-authored audiobook by Brandon Sanderson and Mary Robinette Kowal. This book is a sci-fi thriller and takes you to a kind of world very much like our own, but set in the future, where there is now this technology known as seeming. So what seeming is that there are all these kind of tiny nanobots inside us which allow us to change the way we perceive the world. So if you were particularly into Art Deco style, you could theme your home to look like an Art Deco. Or you take it to a more extreme end. You could say you do not want to see any violence, and suddenly you'd be walking down the street, and if someone was being mugged or beaten up next to you, you would not see them. So because your seeming would just filter it out. And it was such an interesting concept. And this world also has cloning, where the people who live there go to renewal centres where kind of all their bots are replaced. And if after a point when they've been to a renewal centre they die, their bodies can be retrieved and a clone can be made, and all those memories from when you were last in a renewal centre can be put into that clone, so you can basically never die. And it's quite a short, I think about 3-hour audio tape, but it follows a woman named Holly who wakes up as a clone, assuming that she's somehow died, but lots of her memories of what exactly has happened have disappeared. Really recommend, 5 stars. The Original is a great, fast-paced thriller, super interesting, and with a little bit of an ambiguous ending. So if you have read it, I'd be interested to know what you thought of the ending. The next book I also read was a Brandon Sanderson, and it's the first Brandon Sanderson I've ever been disappointed by. I think I hold his work in such high regard that any book of his that is just good, I'm disappointed by. Brandon, you disappointed me. It's okay. And that book is The Alloy of Law, which is one of 3 novellas set in the Mistborn universe 300 years after the Hero of Ages finishes. And it follows a man named Wax, who is a twinborn. So it means that he has both ferrochemy and allomantic abilities. So for those who haven't read the Mistborn books, allomancy is a magical power where you can consume certain metals and burn the metals within you to produce magical abilities, and those can range from pushing on metals, tampering with people's emotions, being able to detect other people using allomancy. And then ferrochemy is another type of magic within this universe. So this book follows someone who's a twin-born. He has been living out in the Roughs and then comes back to Ellendale, which is a big city because of a family tragedy, and he's expected to leave his kind of outlander ways and become part of the gentry within this city. And there are people being kidnapped alongside robberies, and he investigates exactly why this is happening. And again, fabulous to see the magic system in more depth. Found that really interesting. Also some introduction to some more metals that did different things, which I loved. But I just found some of the characters a little bit too silly for my liking. I also thought it was weird that there was this one woman who was objectified a lot, and there's a point when she even comments on it and is like, I'm more than an object, but then nothing really comes of it. And she did have some cool bits, but I just would have liked more critique on how society was treating her. Again, it was a very short book, a lot to pack in a very small amount of time. It was fast paced. It was good, just I didn't enjoy it anywhere near as much, and I found it a bit of a drag to get through at times. So the next book, I'm not going to talk about for too long, but I read Hollowpox, the third book in Jessica Townsend's Nevermore series, and I've done a whole video raving about this series because I absolutely adore it. I think it's one of my favourite reads from 2020, and the Nevermore series is a middle grade fantasy about a girl called Morrigan who is brought up being told she's cursed, and with the knowledge that on her 11th birthday she is going to be killed because she is a hindrance to society. But fortunately she gets whisked away from the place she lives and taken to the magical world of Nevermore, where she then gets inducted into a society. So the first book follows her trials to get involved in the Wondrous Society. The second book investigates people being kidnapped within Nevermore. And then the third book, which was written before 2020, talks about a pandemic. They're all just so whimsical and fun and magical and warm with some sinister elements, and I just love these books so much. They just are so creative, and I love the world that Jessica's created. So I would really recommend that series, and if you want to know more, check out my video. So the next two books I listened to are actually rereads, and I think this might be the fourth or fifth time that I've reread them, and that is The Name of the Wind and The Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss. And this is probably my favourite fantasy series. Every time I reread it, I notice little gems hidden within Patrick Rothfuss's story. It's so well thought out, and the layers and layers of meaning behind everything he's written is phenomenal. This story follows a man named Quoth, who is currently acting as an innkeeper in this war-torn world where the barriers between Fae and the kind of realm which everyone else lives in has become blurry. And he is tracked down by someone known as the chronicler. He's tracked down by a man who wants to write his story, and he finds Quoth and basically says, will you tell your story? Because it appears that the reason the world is in the state it is in currently is because of the actions that Quoth took during his life. And Quoth decides to share his story. And the story follows him from when he is a kid, living with the Ademaru, who are a travelling band, as he grows up, and kind of the hardship he goes under, his obsession with this magical creature called the Chandrian, his time at the university learning magical arts. There is so much on YouTube about this series. I would absolutely recommend it. Just be warned, the third book is still not out and may never be out, but still read it. And then the last book I read is Pine by Francine Toon. So let me just read the description of this book. A literary gothic thriller to chill the marrow. A simmering gothic thriller. This is not a gothic thriller. I went in expecting a gothic thriller, and what I got is a kind of supernatural book with about 30 pages of crime fiction. And that meant, because I wasn't anticipating this style of book, I was initially a little bit disappointed, but there are some fabulous bits about the book that I will go into shortly. So Pine follows a young girl called Lauren who lives with her father in the Scottish Highlands in this very tiny village with only about 4 houses. And her father are driving down the road, and there is suddenly a woman in the middle of the road, and her father seems to recognise the woman, takes her in, and then the next morning the woman's disappeared and no one apart from Lauren remembers the woman ever being there. And within this village there are all these rumours about the disappearance of Lauren's mother, the implications that the father was somehow involved, and also all this kind of, as this book progresses, all these kind of weird supernatural stuff starts happening. And I found a lot of the kind of things that were supposed to be scary were a bit cliche, like answering a phone and there being a loud noise or kind of the smell of death. But then there were some wonderful things of kind of Lauren's room being altered in subtle ways and stone rings being made, which I'd wish there'd been a bit more emphasis on. It also didn't really use the environment in an effective way to create a sinister atmosphere. I don't know, I was just imagining like these misty, blustery Scottish Highlands, and maybe it's because I've never been to a Scottish Highland and what I imagine is not the reality, which potentially this book gave, but that atmosphere didn't really get me. But what I did love about this book is the relationship between Lauren and her father, Niall, who is suffering with alcoholism and likely a mental illness as well. And Niall knows he is a bad father in terms of he'll drink too much, will not always get up in time to make Lauren food, he may not put the heating on for her, he might not always be able to look after him, and you can see his shame, and he does really love her. Like, he does little gestures throughout the book where he just wants to make her happy, yet then he kind of folds in on himself and lets her down. And Lauren also, you can see, really cares for her dad. She's having to grow up too quickly. So that was great. I gave this book a 3-star read. It was good. It wasn't what I was expecting. And I think if it was advertised in a different way, it would have been more enjoyable. But for a debut novel, I think Francine Toon's done a really great job, and I'm looking forward to seeing what else she's got, especially in terms of her ability to create really raw and beautiful characters. So those are all the books I read during the month of November, except those non-fiction books that I will get around to talking about. Looking forward to seeing what all you guys have read, and take care, look after yourselves, and have a very wonderful start of your December. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.